and welcome to the Troubadour Podcast. Today I'm going to be talking to you about the TV show, The Last of Us. Now, you may have seen this show, you may not have seen the show. If you have not seen the show, The Last of Us, I would recommend not watching this episode with me. But I will say before you leave that if you're on the fence about whether you should watch and why you should watch and all those things, let me just give you a quick little synopsis of what's going on without spoiling anything that I hope will help you decide if you want to enjoy this show or not. So this is, again, just a quick little synopsis here. Just basically what the story is about is an aging smuggler attempts to escort a wily young girl who potentially holds a cure to save humanity across a post-apocalyptic America, which has been devastated by a fungus that turns humans into monsters. So this is a post-apocalyptic story. It's a 9-episode HBO series starring Bella Ramsey and Pedro Pascal. And it's about this relationship that of their journey through America in this very different world. It's a survival story, and it's, again, about their relationship and so on. And we will, so now if hopefully that will inspire you to go check it out. It's a great story. It's not about zombies, although there are some zombies in it because that's part of what happens to the world, and that's set up right in the beginning. The opening scene is this scene that I'm showing if you're able to watch on YouTube. Between two doctors and a talk show host in 1968. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a second. And they set up kind of the whole scenario of what could go wrong, which does eventually go wrong in 2003. And so we have an alternative history in a sense where 2003, a start of the pandemic of this disease, this fungal infection that is able to attach themselves to humans, and it turns them into zombies essentially. But again, the story is not primarily about zombies or even surviving from zombies. That's kind of the backdrop that allows us to have this interesting perspective on human relationships. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So if that's the non-spoiler. So if you haven't seen it, there you go check that out. From now on, I'm going to be talking spoilers. So please turn it off. I do think this is this is definitely a show where it's worth not having it spoiled. Right. And I think that's true of a lot of shows, but especially here. So please don't spoil this for yourself. Now, I do want to have a quick little snippet on my view of the role of critics and reviewers. So I don't consider myself a reviewer. I'm not a reviewer. There's 1.5 million reviewers today. But what I am trying to do, and why I will once in a while do one of these types of episodes, is when I believe that things that I've learned teaching and studying literature, drama, novels, epic poetry, poems, etc., is not to be able to tear apart and critique and say, this is good, this is bad, blah, blah, blah. But more for the purpose of helping you, the listener to me, expand, enlarge, and further enjoy great art, to elevate your ability to experience art of all kinds. That's what I believe is the real role of a critic. I believe that there's a tradition of people like me, Samuel Johnson. I think even Harold Bloom does this in a more modern era. And there's a whole tradition of this. When we think of critics, we tend to think of people who just, go on Rotten Tomatoes, or they make a little YouTube video like, the Critical Drinker, and they're basically attacking everything. That's why they choose this story, in a sense, is to just tear it apart. And maybe they'll compliment one or two things, but it's basically an analytic approach where it's like, look how crappy this is. And this is why it's crappy. That's essentially how we think of critics. I do not attest to that. I'm not saying you should never do that, but I don't believe that is the primary role of a good critic. A good critic who criticizes, critiques, who takes apart something of great art, or any art, great or bad, the goal should be in some way, when putting it together for the mind of the audience of your critique, to help them better able to enjoy art as such. That is your primary job as a critic. So this is my call to all the critics to stop criticizing, start building a better understanding of how to enjoy grander and grander art. And that should be the overall goal. So I'm going to take this opportunity to kind of show some literary elements that are not textbook and boring. I want to try to make them enjoyable to how they can help, how these little, I'm really going to take one kind of basic concept and we'll look at it from all different kinds of angles, or literary concept from this show to hopefully help you further enjoy the show. And I hope you have watched it and then you'll watch it again. I've watched the show a couple times. I really love it. It's a show I know I'm going to return to in the future. And there are great reasons, that I do this. And, I think this is one of the values of enjoying art is that you can return to, a great novel, a great poem. And in a sense, a good work of art is meant to be reviewed, seen again. And that's a sign that it's a good work of art. It's not just something to be thrown by the trash heap. It killed 2 hours. A lot of, movies can just kind of kill 2 hours. That's what you're doing. Here, you're not killing 9 hours, which is how long I think it takes. Here, I think you're really experiencing something that's worth discussing. So I'll say up front, my goal is going to be to show the one aspect of that I think is critical to this, and that's different than some apocalyptic movies or TV shows and artwork, which is the focus on pairs. So there are a lot of post-apocalyptic movies and shows, and there's The Walking Dead, there's the movie Logan, there's Postman with Kevin Costner, there's Waterworld with Kevin Costner. There's a variety of these, and that's just the beginning. There's a ton of post-apocalyptic. It's a whole cliche in science fiction, a dystopia. Hunger Games in a sense is almost like a post-apocalyptic story. So there's a lot of these. It's a very common theme in what we might think of broadly as the science fiction fantasy genre. And there's a good reason why it's popular, because it forces you to strip out all of civilization technologically and ask yourself what remains. And that's, one hint is this is called The Last of Us. And there's a question of what is The Last of Us? When you take away everything else around us, when you take away my microphones and, my delivery from Amazon and how easy, here growing bigger and bigger because it's just so easy access to food. What's left when you take away all that stuff? And that's what post-apocalyptic can really focus on. Different post-apocalyptic stories will focus on different aspects of this. And in this one, what we're going to be talking about is what they chose for The Last of Us. And they have throughout the series, there are numerous pairings. And that's where we're going to focus is the pairings, the relationships between two people in particular that really help to understand what the show is trying to say. Now, before we jump into this, there's two things I want to discuss first really briefly. First is this issue of the TV and the game. So the video game is where this all is coming from. The video game is PlayStation PC game, I believe. I've never played it. I did start watching some of the clips to see the similarities. And yeah, there's a lot of similarities, but there are some differences as well. And the differences are profound. But I just want to make this statement about adaptations, which I've made it in other locations before. My general statement of adaptations is that the source material is irrelevant. Let me repeat that. The source material is irrelevant. Get it out of your mind. It's irrelevant. I don't care if you've already seen it. Your job as a listener, as a reader, as a viewer of this work is to see what the artists are doing with this thing. This new thing that you're watching, reading, seeing, experiencing. That's a new thing. The source material is irrelevant. Shakespeare took all of his plots from somewhere else. That's irrelevant to reading Romeo and Juliet or watching it on stage, to enjoying Othello. It doesn't matter that Antony and Cleopatra come from Plutarch. It's irrelevant. So spell that word out. Blank out your mind when you're thinking about so don't criticize it. Oh, it's not like that in the book or the game. Does not matter. That is irrelevant. It's a new work of art. And there's, all of Renaissance literature and art and sculpture is taken from somewhere else. And you don't look at the Michelangelo and say, well, it's not exactly like that in the Bible. It doesn't effing matter. It's a work of art that stands on its own. That's the only way to experience art. And if you don't agree with that, then you should leave. This is not the place for you. I'm trying to help you understand and enjoy a work of art. And that's what we're going to be doing today. And so we're only looking at the show as a show and as this thing. Now, there may be, once you've done that, I'll say as a side note, there may be some reasons down the line to like enjoy the show more by comparing it for fun. That's fine. But as understanding, as experiencing, as analyzing, as critiquing a work of art, you only look at the work of art. And you don't, forget the broader culture. Sometimes an art should be an end in itself. It is the beginning and the middle and the end is the art. That's it. Okay. There's my little rant about people who piss me off about, judging one medium, book or movie, by the standards of another medium, like the book. So you never, ever, 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 ever compare and contrast and say, oh, the book was better. Yeah, I mean, you probably had a better experience with the book because it's a book, and a book has the ability to have a grander experience than a movie. That's just the nature of the medium. But you should never say you have to, when you watch a movie, you should forget the book exists when you're watching it and just try to enjoy this work of art. Okay. So I did want to quickly also mention this opening scene I said I would mention earlier. And this is before we're going to get into these pairings in a second here, or in a minute or two. This opening scene is 1968. It's a talk show. It's, very smart scientists. And, they're saying some of the same cliches that are always said in every science fiction story. I mean, this is why environmental, I just have to go on this, this is why environmentalism is such a religion today, is because this is so dominant in our culture, is the view that we have of global warming and things like that. Cause that's essentially the argument here. The argument that they make is the same argument you see over and over again in post-apocalypse, is that somehow human evil is changing something that leads to a disaster. And that's the impetus for the beginning of this apocalypse. And you see that going all the way back to, Frankenstein and 19th century sci-fi literature, precursors, where they're kind of saying that the moral evil of humans leads to X disaster. And it's based on this action. And then the cliche of modern times is that it's quote unquote global warming. Now, whatever you feel about global warming, it's just an impetus to start the whole thing, and whatever, that's fine. So, the idea is that there's this fungus, which is a real fungus, as I understand it, called cordyceps, that do take over mostly insects, ants, and things of that nature. And you could see pictures of this actually happening, where you do have actually fungus growing from this ant. And apparently they are directed to go up on a leaf and explode so that the cordyceps, little fungus can infect other ants. I think that's something like that happens. So this kind of thing has precedent in the physical or in the animal kingdom. Excuse me. So what you have in this opening is the supposition, the hypothesis, if at this point there is no reason for cordyceps to evolve, to infect humans, to get into humans, because our bodies are too hot. So they can't survive and they don't need to at this point. But maybe if the world gets hotter, the cordyceps will evolve to be able to survive hotter environments, in which case they will be able to infect humans. And that is, in fact, what happens in the show in 2003, September. I think it begins somewhere like September 24th in Jakarta, and then it hits Austin, Texas, which is where the show actually begins, September 26th, 2003. And this is where we get our first pairing. So first off, we have a lot, like I said, the theme of this video that I'm doing right now is going to be discussing and looking at the pairs of people and how they inform the broader pair of people and the the experience that's going on with the plot theme that I mentioned earlier of Joel, this aging smuggler who's attempting to escort this wily young girl who's clearly she uses humor, puns, sarcasm, and even violence to keep people away from her because she's been abandoned so much. And, Joel, on the other hand, is basically separated himself from humanity and just focused on survival, except for quote unquote family, which is basically just Tommy and a little bit Tess, which we'll talk about those pairs in a second. But the whole story is about the relationship between these two characters, Joel and Ellie, as they go across, Joel slowly takes on that responsibility of looking after Ellie. And that's what makes this such a beautiful story, is it's their story going across this journey and, growing and enjoying or experiencing each other. We'll talk about that more. So the first obvious relationship is between Sarah and Joel. So, they obviously have a very loving, a little bit of caustic. She's a probably a sophomore or maybe a junior. I don't remember if they say in high school. She's around Ellie's age, of course, in 2003. Joel is 36 in 2003. This is expressed, so we know that he's 56 20 years later. And it's, the opening scene, which is, I think, only like 20 minutes or so. But it develops their relationship very quickly, where she buys him a watch for her, or she fixes his watch by taking his money, but it shows that she cares. She goes on this little journey to help him, all while slowly civilization is starting to unravel around them without them really realizing it. And then, of course, as the apocalypse hits, they try to escape Austin, Texas, which is where they're from. And in the process, Sarah is shot by a soldier and she dies. Now, the arc of this story is very short, of course, but it's very profound on the main character for obvious reasons, and it will color the whole experience. This is, one of the more obvious pairings that everyone who watches the show obviously notices. And by the way, you've probably noticed all the other pairs, but we're going to focus on them, and this is an important aspect of enjoying art some more. But this pairing has clear ramifications for Joel and from Joel as a character. And we learn about his arc through this. Basically, he tends to be, or after this moment, he is basically incapable of being a human in a real sense of the word. He is lost completely. After this, even 20 years later, he's still a completely broken man. He's, merely surviving because he has Tess and Tommy to fight for. And that's the only reason he's sticking around, basically. And we learn, by the way, and again, spoilers, that he did try to kill himself a day or so after Sarah died. And he failed. And he doesn't know why he failed, but he flinched at the last second when he shot himself. And that's why he has this scar that Ellie asks him about in episode 3. So that's that is obviously an emotional arc of his experience, where he has this gaping wound emotionally in himself that is not able to be cured by time. And that's something we'll talk about later. It's just something that is part of, he lost this part of himself that is so important to who he is as a character. Okay, so the next one that we're going to talk about really quickly is the relationship between Joel and Tommy. Now, Joel and Tommy, when you watch the series, we don't get a lot about Tommy, but it's important to understand a couple contrasting points in the way that they feel about each other. But number one is that Tommy is the idealist. Joel is not an idealist. Joel is much more pragmatic. He's much more practical. He's much more, just survive and move on and do the things that are necessary. But Tommy is the type of person who, when someone hits a girl at a bar, he intervenes and he goes to jail. And that's what happens in the opening sequence of the series, is Tommy's in jail. And that's why Joel leaves Sarah to go get Tommy. And then he comes back right as Sarah's about to be attacked by one of the cordyceps zombies. So we don't get a lot of their relationship in the series in terms of them being together the whole time. But the whole point of Joel leaving is his desire to take care of his brother, because again, Joel is defined, he's a smuggler, but as a person, he's defined and he's only continuing to live in this horrible world for one reason: family, which to him is essentially just Tess and Tommy. That's the only reason he's really alive. That's all that he exists for, is to help keep them alive. And when Tommy stops telling him stops radioing him, he gets worried and he decides to cross from Boston clear across the country to Wyoming. And Tommy is an idealist, and he is someone who is described, at least by Joel, so we don't see his idealism too much, except in one kind of episode, but he is an idealist in the sense that he's described as an idealist because he joins the military, trying to be a hero. He wants to help people. He joins later the Fireflies because he wants to, again, help people and save the world, is how Joel thinks about it, when Joel says, that's ridiculous. Just live your life, in a sense, and live it. So Joel is basically motivated by living for the specific concrete values of his own existence. I think of Joel as a very selfish character. And I think of that as a good thing, is that he only looks out for and enjoys or experiences the people that he chooses to. In that case is Tommy, who he continues to choose, if ever there's a time to get rid of a brother, it's a post-apocalypse, and he doesn't. He chooses to hold on to that. Same thing with Tess. And then, of course, this man who's very reluctant to take on new, responsibilities and care for other people, will he take on Ellie in that loving relationship or not? Tommy, on the other hand, wants to save the world. And at least he did. But then, the interesting dichotomy, the interesting, you could think of it as like a doppelganger, twin aspect, is that Tommy has now changed his idealistic ways, in a sense. And that's why he's stopped messaging his brother. He starts to become very selfish because he wants to preserve this, perfect little utopia that he's been a part of in, I think, Jackson, Wyoming, by staying away from his troubled brother, his broken brother who will do anything to preserve, survive. And that's something that Tommy cannot do and chooses not to do. And so there's a conflict there internally to both of the characters, I think. And that informs their relationship. And again, so they are caring brothers. They respect each other. Joel is the elder, and he looks out for Tommy. He's always looked out for Tommy. There's, a line early on, I think in the first couple of minutes of the season, in episode 1, where, I think Sarah, Joel's daughter, says to Joel something like, he loves you. He says about Joel, or excuse me, she says to Joel that Tommy loves you, right? Like, and then Joel says, no, he's just dependent on me. There's a difference, right? And it's a kind of joke thing, but there is something here about the relationship between dependence on somebody and having to rely on somebody, and and then choosing to take that responsibility of that person, and love. That there's a relationship that is trying to be, or is being expressed here. So that is the, Tommy and Joel relationship. Now, I want to stop here for a moment and kind of use our broader knowledge of post-apocalyptic stories to help us better understand what makes this a little bit more unique. Now, this, by the way, this story of an aged smuggler or an aged warrior, which Joel is a smuggler, but he's actually a warrior. He's a fighter. He's able to survive. He's capable of, he has a certain set of skills, as they say. And he's an aged warrior. His ability is waning. He's getting old. He's hard of hearing, and he's, got bad knees, and he's not as strong as he used to be. But the aged warrior who reluctantly takes on a young person to help them on this moral journey is somewhat of a cliche, especially in the Western. So you have a movie in the 60s called True Grit, where John Wayne essentially does the same thing. He's this old, not bounty hunter. Is he a bounty hunter? Can't remember what, but he's basically like a Western hero, but he's old. He's a has-been in a sense. He's not as strong and good and accurate as he used to be. And he doesn't want to do this anymore. He doesn't want to be the hero. He just wants to be left alone and drink and be an alcoholic. And it takes a young girl to make him be this person. This is a story that's been told. Logan, the movie about Wolverine that was done recently, is literally that same exact thing. This is expanded over. So this is the same thing, but expanded over 9 episodes and 9 hours or so. Okay, so the reason I just want to bring this up is kind of contrast to the story of The Last of Us, to see different aspects, to help us see what's unique about this particular story. So that aspect is very cliche, but in this show, we get to expand it. Now, another common post-apocalyptic story is about leadership and building communities. So The Last of Us does have that aspect, but really faded into the background. And this is why understanding a little bit about art and what you're watching is really helpful. So there's a concept in literature and art called important. And what is the focus of a work of art? So not is that element there, but is it important? Does the artist really focus on it? So in this story, you have the FEDRA, that's like Federal Disaster Relief Associate, something like that. And they are basically the new fascists that are really authoritarian. And there's some argument in the story that maybe, Ellie makes the argument in a sense that maybe that's necessary in this horrible world that we live in to keep order so people won't just kill each other, which they do when there isn't FEDRA, by the way. And there is something, in history where you do need a strong person to keep everyone from, because when civilization is gone, you just have people trying to survive together and it becomes horrific. I'm not going to talk about the different political systems. That's not the point. So FEDRA, you have FEDRA as one, you have the Fireflies, which are the rebels trying to bring back democracy and as that model. Okay. So, there's the question though of, the show, The Last of Us, does not focus on that. That is not the most important aspect of the show. If you watch a show like The Walking Dead, there is a question throughout that series, although relationships still exist in The Walking Dead, and there's even a famous tryst, love triangle between three members of the group, but and I only watched the first 5 or 6 seasons. I haven't seen the last several, but the focus of The Walking Dead is much more on how to build a community and how to be a leader in that community. And Rick is a leader. He's got his cowboy hat. He's got his, Western gun, and he's not just a survivalist. He's trying to figure out how to build a community and keep a community alive in this horrific world where everything is stripped and all of morals are stripped away. And for instance, he has rules of how to get into his group. He asks a series of questions in the first couple seasons, because again, the focus is different forms of leadership to develop a community. And throughout the series, as this group that goes along with Rick in The Walking Dead, this group is put up against other ways of forming a society. And some of them are horrific and evil. And some of them kind of work, but they don't work properly. There's something that mixes unwell with Rick's group and his way of doing it. And Rick even changes his form. So my point is that his form of leadership. So my point is that there are methods that he is implementing to try to be a leader. And that's the focus of that story. And there's other stories, The Postman with Kevin Costner, where it's really about what aspects of civilization might lead to better societies. And in this case, he chooses being a rebel, and under all circumstances, when you have this horrible world. I actually like that movie a lot more than some people really attack it. I think it's a good movie, but he tries to essentially he puts together the post office the idea of bringing post as a way to connect all of us. And that's an important part. That's the focus of that. Relationships are not the focus as much. In The Last of Us, it's all about relationships. Everything's about relationships. Even though we see fireflies, we see Fedra, we see a couple leaders, Kathleen, David from the world, that religious group at the end, toward the end. We even see Marlene, who's the head of the Fireflies or a faction of the Fireflies. We see these leaders, but the focus of the artist, the creator, is on the relationships. And the next big relationship to talk about, of course, is Joel and Tess. So Joel and Tess, we unfortunately only see a little bit of, just like the Joel and Tommy, but that's what it means to be a subplot, to be a smaller aspect, to not be the focal point of the whole story. The main plot is the Joel-Ellie relationship. All these other relationships, why I'm pointing them out, is to help you see how these other relationships can add to the emotional impact and the experience and the contemplation of this story. So Joel and Tess they are partners in smuggling. Now, it does seem like they are also affectionate, but the affection is clearly strained. It's not an I love you affection, right? Like even when Joel is at Bill and Frank's, and of course we're going to talk about the Bill and Frank relationship as a duo, but when Joel and Tess are there, they are enjoying a meal together, and Joel can't really say my girlfriend, my wife, or anything. He has to say and he stutters and then says, if mine were to bring strangers into our situation, I would be frustrated, because he is incapable of that kind of love right now. I think that's a major aspect of who he is he's incapable of really experiencing that. And Tess accepts that, and she accepts him as that. She is also like him. So they're compatible, because she's a strong warrior and she's a smuggler, and just like him, and she's a survivalist. And they got together, seemingly somewhat just a few years after the outbreak of this disaster, this pandemic that destroyed the world. And they did some really bad things. They killed innocent people. And one of the things we learn about that is that they did the same thing that occurred to Joel and Ellie on their journey, when a couple of Kansas City guys pretend to be injured in order to pull over a truck, presumably to kill the passengers of the truck or the vehicle and take all their supplies. And that's how Joel and Tess apparently, on some level, that's how they survived. That's why they're weary of anybody, because they've been on the other side and they know they're hardened survivors. They're one of the few people that have survived this long, especially on their own. Like, they haven't just lived like Ellie, who has just been born and raised in a Fedra camp, or in a Fedra QZ quarantine zone, which, is still a hard way of life. But she's never left Boston. She's 14 years old. She's never left Boston. That's obviously very different from Joel and Tess, who are 57 now. They're 36 or in their 30s. I don't know how old Tess is when the disaster struck. So their relationship showcases a semi-romantic kind of relationship between them, but not really a romantic relationship. They are, there's definitely tenderness and love there. And there is clearly, I'm sure there's sexual relationships. I mean, he's laying in bed and Tess, comes into bed and puts her arm around him. So they're together, of course, but it's again a survival type thing. And Joel does kind of look at her as family. And there's a line of what he says later in the show, I think in episode 3, he explains to Ellie why he chose to take Ellie on this journey, why he agrees to it. And one of the things he says is like, Tess is like family, right? So he can't even say that she is family. She's like family. She's close enough that it gives him something to, a reason to keep going. And he takes on that burden. And it really is the relationship between Joel and Tess, which is a kind of father-mother, aspect, where Tess has maternal instincts, of affection toward Ellie, she starts to respect her. She says, "You got some balls on you, sister." When Ellie tells her what she did what she did to get bit and find out that she's immune, which was to, go into that mall and basically get attacked. So it's that relationship, the Tess Joel relationship, that convinces Joel to take on Ellie for at least a few more minutes, in a sense. So remember, Joel and Ellie are not going to be, Joel is not planning, does not want to take this girl anywhere because he doesn't want more of a burden. He doesn't want more responsibility. He wants the minimum amount of responsibility needed to survive and do what he thinks is the only thing worth living for, which is to protect and take, to survive for himself, but also for the only two people he really cares about, which are Tommy and Tess. So Tess, though, because she's part of this, she convinces him to take on this little girl, Ellie. And, it's part of it is Joel has never been an idealistic person. He's always been very practical, as we mentioned earlier. Tess is just like him in some degree, but she still has more optimism. She's not as optimistic and idealistic as Tommy, constantly joining things. She knows what she did. She knows that she's a bad person. And she thinks that, look, if I'm going to die for something, if I'm going to live for something, if I'm going to fight for something, it's going to be for something good in the world that I have done. And that's this Ellie character is that person, not only because of her immunity, I think, although that's the excuse she gives. That's one of the reasons to give it higher moral justification. But there, again, the imagery they use, there's so much of this innocence of Ellie. And, we're going to talk more about Ellie and Joel as we go on, but that's I think a big part of what's happening with these two characters is that innocence that is Ellie. She still has that, she has been protected from the world, even though she lives in a crappy area, which is this Fedra environment. She has been able to maintain a lot of her, still little childish mentality. And, there's a scene where in I think the beginning of episode 2, where we're looking down, the camera's looking down on Ellie while she's lying down in this grass. And she looks very, it's a very innocent, natural world. Like she's just this, creature that needs to be protected. And and she has no parents, so she has no one to protect her. And she's reluctant to have anybody protect her, but she does start to feel a kinship to Tess. And that's when there's a kind of passing of the buck between Tess and Joel. And Joel is very reluctant to take on this responsibility. He does not want to do it, but he eventually does because he sees Tess as a like family. So that's part of this overarching theme we're going to start talking about of the relationship between Joel and Ellie, and how these other, Tommy and Joel, Tess and Joel, and how they look, and Joel and Sarah, which is why he's reluctant to take on anybody, and how they all find into each other. Okay, now we're going to get to probably the most controversial and to some degree interesting relationship, which is the Bill and Frank relationship. Now, I've already done an episode on my YouTube channel on this episode 3 when it came out, because the political cultural right, as usual, and went a little crazy because they said, why do we have to have another homosexuality? Like every show today just has to have homosexuals in it, blah, blah, blah. There's an article that was written about how assisted suicide is not romantic. It's like, well, okay, it depends how you tell the story, right? But it depends what the basic idea behind it is. But it does bring up interesting moral questions. After watching the entirety of the series, I see this as even more important than I did earlier. It is a critical aspect. This duo informs this, again, the broader duo of the story in a very helpful to understand the issue of choice, that it stresses that it's about the choices of who we accept as the love that we want, which in a sense, in a broader, more abstract way, I think you can take it as also the values that we take on. I mean, that's what this story tends to be about, or I think becomes about. And to me, I see it as a very, again, more selfish story, which from my point of view is a good thing. This is not selfish in the sense of destroying other people for your own thing, but it's the protecting of your own long-range values and choosing your own long-range values. So Bill and Frank are two homosexual men, and Frank was, or Bill, who's the survivalist who lives in a bunker, he's a misanthrope, he hates humans, and he is suspicious of everybody and the whole society at large. And so he's well prepared when this disaster hits. He was already a gay man. I mean, there's gay porn in his car, and, it's clear that it's not like he, all of a sudden slowly, this is a story about Frank turning Bill into a homosexual. He was already, homosexual, or at least he had those thoughts. He had never been with a man, he reveals to Frank. Frank is also a homosexual man. And what I find interesting about this is, I try to think about, like, what would it be like in this story if Frank had fallen into the pit, into Bill's pit that he set up around his house, his little city, that's his town now after the apocalypse. And he has all these traps, and Frank falls into one of them. What would it have been like if it was a semi or decent looking young woman, or a woman of a similar age? Like, Frank is probably in his 50s, 40s, because he's in his 60s, I think, when he dies at the end. So, let's say a 30-year-old mildly attractive woman fell in there, and he wasn't homosexual. I mean, the thing that might have been less stressed is that because it would have been a cliche of, a man and something that we experience all the time in these stories, I think what would have been less focused on is the element of the choice that he makes. So it's true that he is a gay man and he makes a choice to be with another gay man, although I don't know if he knows that Frank is gay right away or not. Although he might suspect it. And look, this is going to be controversial, but I think that there's a semblance of women are not as quite as physically strong. So there's a less likelihood of survival in this kind of world, on their own. Now, I think Frank has a similar type of problem. He's not as strong as Bill, and he, comes to rely on him. But nevertheless, I think it's more emphasized if it's a woman. And that's really the main reason why I think it's an interesting choice, is that it's less emphasis, like Frank, because he's a robust bearded man who also looks like a survivalist, he might be able to survive a little bit easier out in the wild. So the choice that the choice that Bill has to bring him into his home it emphasizes the choice aspect of it. It really emphasizes that he's taking a risk by letting him go in, and he's going to, take care of this man that he doesn't know. And he's very reluctant to do that. When Joel and Tess come over, even though Frank vouches for them, Bill has his gun on the table the whole time. So, in another sense, this is the only real romantic story in the whole series. There is no other romantic story. Even, like I was saying, the Tess and Joel, and part of the Tess and Joel, they're not really romantic, not in this sense. And that to me is an interesting choice that this series chose to focus on this. In a whole episode, we see their entire romantic life together from beginning, middle, and end. And that, in this post-apocalyptic world, which is a way for a writer, an artist, a creator to showcase an element of the duo, the pairing, the doppelganger effect, to kind of help you see the broader picture of all different facets of love and relationships that the creator wants to focus on. And that's very important, I think, to getting this. Now, you may ask, like, well, where's the relationship between a man and a woman? And yeah, I think that's something that should be and can be, should be focused on more. And it would have been nice to have one of those but again, this is just a choice they had. And I think one way that it fits into the broader context is that it, makes it so that it really focuses on the choice aspect. Because if it was a woman, it would have seemed a little bit less of a choice. It's like, okay, so here's a sexual relationship. We need to propagate humanity. I mean, because of the context of this post-apocalyptic world, the choice to be a homosexual is emphasizing the aspect of choosing the values and in your life. And I think that's rather than doing the duty you have to the broader world, which is a very important theme, especially when you think about the ending of the story. So the ending of the story, which we'll talk about it, in soon, because we have a couple more important duos to talk about, and then we'll get there. But the ending is really important to this understanding of the choices you make and about these relationships, and that if it would have been, because it would have seemed so much more natural, so much more like not a choice, so much it would have implications if it was a man and a woman, implications of, your duty to propagate people in this post-apocalyptic world. Well, the creators did, I think, a great job in saying, no. You don't have a duty to anybody. You have a duty to yourself. And the Bill and Frank sequence really emphasizes that. So the Bill and Frank, Frank he continually says, let me love this the way I want to love it. To me, I think that's the broader theme, is let me love the way I want to. And that's the real reason why so many people on the right are very opposed to this whole story and the Bill and Frank sequence, because it really offends a deep philosophical view that they have, which is the real reason to get married is to propagate the human race. And that's literally, popes and so many intellectuals on the right have justified marriage is for the purpose of procreation. That's the justification for sex to them, for instance. Well, here we have the opposite emphasis, that the justification of sex is to enjoy sex and to have a good time and to love things the way you want to love them. And this is, Frank kind of embodies that. He's an artist. He wants to beautify nature, whereas Bill is the opposite. Bill and Frank are a clear relationship between Joel and Tess. They are kind of the doppelgangers, the others, the sequence that shows an aspect of the Joel and Tess relationship without actually showing that in the Joel and Tess relationship. And that's important from a literary standpoint, because if you were to show that aspect of Joel, it would not make the impact of the Joel-Ellie relationship as powerful. Okay, does that make sense? Because what that would do is it would soften Joel, when part of what you need to see him as is this man who's incapable and unwilling to fall in love, not romantically, but as a father-daughter to Ellie. He's very reluctant to emotionally attach himself to this young girl, even though he's clearly being charmed by her as they go along. And if you would have seen the softer side of Joel, that would have undermined that relationship between Joel and Ellie. So what you do as a writer, as a creator, is you do a Bill and Frank. So you see the doppelganger, you see the subplot of this thing. And it also builds into the background of the story of what happened between 2003 and 2023. It also it's integrated into the broader plot, which is the journey between Joel and Ellie. So it's a beautiful, perfect, flawless, great job that they did with this episode. Any criticisms of it, if you have deep criticisms of this sequence, that's fine. Everyone is allowed to have their own criticisms, but I challenge you to question if maybe some of those criticisms are your own homophobia. And I don't mean homophobia necessarily that you're an evil, horrible, person who wants to kill homosexuals, but maybe you have a little bit of that in you and you need to question it. And that's what art can help you do, by the way. So just really try to meditate on it and try to, just take it as like, why can't two men get together and enjoy themselves? Like, what obligation do they have to find a woman and have sex with a woman for procreation, especially if they are more attracted to men? Okay. So the Bill and Frank, they have, I really love this scene where they're having a civilized meal together, because this is what Frank adds to Bill's life. And even though Bill is reluctant to do that, but he, at the end of his life has experienced that and he enjoys it. So he is watering plants. He loves Frank a lot. And part of why he loves Frank is because, Frank does push to have friends. He shows Bill that life is worth living for things other than pure, mere misanthropic survival, being a hermit. That there's something wrong with being a hermit, and not the normal thing that we think of as wrong with being a hermit, which is, again, your duty to other people and your duty to procreate and expand the human race as some kind of biological basis that we hear today. The real reason to not hate humans is because there are good humans. There's valuable humans, that life can be beautiful, that you can surround yourself with beauty. As Frank puts it, paying attention is it's how we show love. And that's true. And I would say that that's the fundamental theme of this whole story, is paying attention. It's how we show love. And that's what that's what Bill requires to learn. And it's what Joel is very reluctant to learn until later on in the story. Now, of course, I just have to mention there's this whole sequence of the last meal between the two characters, which to me showcases their entire story as a kind of, like I was saying earlier, an alternative to the Joel Tess story, since we don't see any romance between them. And because I don't think there is romance, because I don't think Joel is quite capable of romance. And one thing that happens, and I do want to read this letter because I think it's very useful in understanding what's going on between Joel. And this is what the story has done to build Bill as a counter to Joel, because they're the same person in many, many ways. Joel and Bill respect each other because they're both capable people who are able to survive this world, but they do it in very different ways. Joel does it by doing anything necessary, including killing innocent bystanders. Bill, in a sense, is a little bit better. He is better because he kills no innocent people. He just hates everybody and just avoids them all. And that's his solution. But Joel, if Bill were out in the world, he'd probably do what Joel does, though. And if Joel had been a survivalist beforehand with no kids, he probably would do what Bill did. That's why they're a good doppelganger for each other. So after the assisted suicide, which I talked about in my other YouTube video, if you want to see that, we get this letter. And this letter is great. It's the turning point. It's a very big pivotal moment in the series, because it is the moment when Joel, after he reads the letter, he goes outside to get a moment of peace, or to get a moment of resolution. And then he decides to take Ellie to his brother, Tommy, across the country, which means he essentially takes on the responsibility of caring for this young lady. So what does Bill say to Joel to get him to do that? So I'm going to read the whole letter. It's not that long. August 29th, 2023. If you find this, please do not come into the bedroom. We left a window open so that the house wouldn't smell, but it will probably be a sight. I'm guessing you found this, Joel, because anyone else would have been electrocuted or blown up by one of my traps. Hee hee, hee hee. Take anything you need. The bunker code is the same as the gate code, but in reverse. Do not make a mistake or you will get blown to shit. I am not joking. Don't fuck that up. Hee hee, hee hee, hee hee. Excuse me. Anyway, I never liked you, but still, it's like we're friends, almost, and I respect you. So I'm going to tell you something because you're probably the only person who will understand. I used to hate the world, and I was happy when everyone died, but I was wrong because there was one person worth saving, and that's what I did. I saved him, and then I protected him. That's why men like you and me are here. We have a job to do, and God help any motherfuckers who stand in our way. I leave you all my weapons and equipment. Use them to keep Tess safe until such time as you and she decide you've had enough. At that point, I recommend pairing 40 Vicodins with a nice Brunello. So, again, even the suicide really emphasizes the fact of living on your own terms, enjoying life on your own terms. I mean, one of the things we see, for instance, with Frank and why he decides to die at the end himself is because he is presented in the story as a lover of all things beautiful. He has the line about, like I said earlier, about, paying attention is how we love things. And, he has probably multiple sclerosis. He has MS, which ironically is a neurodegenerative disease, which is ironic because remember, we're living in a world where we have a fungus that takes over your neurology and makes you do nasty things. So he has the opposite, basically, like his neurology is failing him. His neural system is failing him and he can't paint. So like you see him painting in this, in 2023, the last sequence of the two characters, and he's trying to paint Bill, but you could see he can't control his hand. So like the right side of Bill's face is all messed up because he's unable to do it. And you see other paintings by Frank, and he's a very capable, good painter. So he's no longer able to do the thing that he loves. He can't eat. He loves food. The opening scene, or the opening meal between them, the way that Frank lights up when he sees the beautiful rabbit, paired with the wine that he had, I don't remember which kind, is a wonderful, scene of he really, really loves this. And then he plays the piano, that song, Long, Long Time. And that's part of what makes Frank Frank, is he loves beauty. And that's the reason he's alive. Now, the reason that Bill is alive is for Frank, in a sense. Like, that's his purpose. And Frank brings that kind of beauty to Bill. Frank has lost that. He's eating soup. He's barely able to sip on it. He's, sipping out of some gross container, some apple juice or something. And that's it. While Frank is able to still enjoy, Bill is still able to enjoy these scrumptious meals. And that's torture to Frank. And so Frank wants to end his life. And that makes sense because he lives on his own terms. And that's the whole point of, I think, the letter, and what is revealed that to Joel is like, Joel, your job is to keep this beauty and these people alive that make your life worth living. And that's the value that these people bring to you, is their beauty. And, the irony, of course, is that Tess is now dead. So he says, here's all my stuff, which will make living and surviving for Tess better for you. But, you do it for Tess, but he lost Tess. It's too late. So Joel makes the decision to honor Tess by finishing the quest, the journey that he had undergone, that she wanted him to undergo, which is taking Ellie. Now, there's a good question that people might ask, which is why not just stay there and stay in this place? And the reason is because, stay in this bunker with Ellie and just let her be a kid and enjoy life. Well, again, the reason is because she's immune and she holds potentially the cure to all humanity. And so there's a sense of, they still want to make their lives better. They want to make the world they live in better. And Joel starts to see that more and more. And that's the argument, for instance, that Joel gives later in the series to Tommy. It's like, Tommy, you're about to be a parent. Don't you want your child to be born in a better world? Well, that's why you should do this. So again, the justification in the series is never do it because it's your duty to humanity. That's what I think Marlene and the Fireflies say. And that's in a sense their view of things. That's not Joel's view. Joel's view is make it better for your family. Make the world better for the people you care about. And in this case, not just the family you were born into, but your chosen family. Now, we're going to move on and go quickly through a couple of these other pairings that are smaller subplots. I think those are the main pairs to go through, but there are some other small but important revealing pairs. So Henry and Sam. Henry and Sam are in the Kansas City sequence, and this is showing a side of love, and particularly between an older and a younger person, or a protector and a protectee, someone who needs to be protected. And so Henry's the older brother, Sam is the younger brother who's also deaf. So he is very vulnerable in this world. I mean, being deaf in general is a vulnerable position to be in, but in a world where he doesn't even know when shooting is happening around him, Henry has to tell him, like, there's shooting going on. He has to sign to him that they're shooting. That's how vulnerable this little kid is. On top of that, he got leukemia a few years ago. So Henry made a choice that was, what he calls a bad guy choice. And that was, he chose to give up the leader of a rebellion leader of Kansas City in order to get the medicine to save Sam. Now, the question you should ask is, was that the right thing to do? And that's a complicated question. I think there is an answer. I want you to answer that question for yourself. I have an answer. But the issue is that he did do it. And in the context of the story, Joel very much understands this because he he did horrible things. He killed innocent people in order to survive as well. And so it's very hard for him to judge this person for what he did. Now, what Joel is trying to do, or what he eventually tries to do because of Tess, is he tries to rectify that decision. He tries to fix the error of his ways. So that's the Henry and Sam story. And there's more to it, of course, but it showcases that dependent-dependee question from a completely non-romantic, just familial. So obviously you get that with Joel and Tommy to some degree, but this is as clear as it can be. Like this boy cannot survive on his own, which, is even more stressed. That aspect is more stressed in this relationship even than the Joel-Ellie relationship, which is the most complex of all this. But the thing with their relationship, Joel and Ellie, is that Ellie may be able to survive on some level. Like, she is a little stronger. Like, the deaf kid has no chance because he's deaf, and it's pretty hard to make that. Okay, so a couple of other real quick pairings. You have Kathleen and Perry, and this is where we get, we have a couple examples of different leaders. But I want to stress again what I was mentioning earlier about The Walking Dead and other stories of post-apocalyptic worlds where leadership is an important component of the art. That's not the case in The Last of Us. That doesn't mean that there are no leaders and we don't get examples of them, but the focus we have, because again, this is the focus of the story, the focus we have of the leaders is their relationships. That's what's important. Remember, important is focal point. That's what the artist in the series chooses to focus on. And so the relationship between Kathleen and Perry, but also between Kathleen and her dead brother, who is the leader of the group, the one that Henry betrayed, is really important here. So Kathleen has a certain view of how justice and how things should happen. She's conniving. She's a liar. She has a very soft exterior, but she's completely capable and willing to use force and convince the men around her, the violent men around her, to use force in order to accomplish her ends. And Perry has a kind of spiritual relationship to her. He allows her to make the decisions, and he is essentially the strong arm to her, mystical or her beliefs and so on. You can contrast that leader with, the Captain Kwong, Ellie. We see that very briefly. But then, of course, on a broader scale, we see the David and James, the cannibals. So this is a completely different type of relationship where with the Kathleen Perry relationship, you have a kind of mutual respect where Perry, I think, is genuinely trying to usurp Fedra, which is Fedra in Kansas City in particular. Joel says there were rumors of how brutal they were, which is more brutal than other places. So in Boston, there's some brutality, of not following the rules, but they do seem to actually have rules and really implement them and stay within that. They don't seem to be, there's no talk about them raping and pillaging and harming everybody. In Kansas City, it really seems like there's a focus on, of what they did, what the Fedra in charge did to the people, which is whatever they wanted to. They were horrible fascists, horrible, the worst of the worst kind of authoritarians possible. Whereas the Boston fascists seem to be really trying to hold on to, some kind of order. Now, the David and James cannibal sequence is you have, again, the use, you have in this case, not the justification that Kathleen uses for what she does, which is to revenge her brother, but you have a rapist who wants power, and he uses religion in order to justify and to keep together his group. And James, who's the friend, so David is the one on the, if you're watching the YouTube, he's the one on the left, but hopefully you should know who he is. He's the one who Ellie eventually butchers brutally with a knife, with a butcher knife, in a very powerful sequence where she lights the lodge on fire and she's suffering. He tries to rape her and so on. So, but the relationship between David and James is, again, a kind of authoritarian, but James is constantly trying to undermine. He's very doubtful of David, and David is holding on to this whole situation very tenuously. And he understands that, which is why he wants to bolster his power by having another strong person like Ellie. And Ellie is a very strong person. But he wants to have her not just, as kind of a co-leader, but he wants to have her as, I think he has some kind of gross, distorted sexual view of her as like a queen to his king type thing. Like it's a very weird, gross situation. All right. So now what does all of this help us do with the main characters? So we've seen, and it's not just the main characters, but I would say toward the more abstract point of the story. And that's what all these concretized pairings can help us do, is really enjoy the overall story. And then again, I think also help us inform our understanding of the final choice that Joel makes. So the whole story of Joel and Ellie is that story that we've been talking about of this aged warrior who knows he's a Western hero. And I don't mean Western as like Achilles from the Iliad, but I mean Western as Western American. It's a very, he knows the land. That's a very Western American story that you see, from all the way in the 20s and 30s. He knows the natives. He knows the people. He knows the dangers. He's knowledgeable and capable of, surviving in this harsh environment, which again is the whole theme of all Westerns, basically especially from like the 30s until the 60s, really. And that's like the fundamental theme of any American Western. Just watch an American Western. That's essentially the basic theme. And that's who he is. He is that person, but he's aged. He's seen too much. He's traumatized. He doesn't want to love anymore. And then you get this sarcastic, very strong, wonderful character of Ellie. And I really, really fell in love with that character because she's so strong. She's a very strong person, and she has really good self-esteem, I think. Although she's very scared, clearly, to be abandoned again. That's the main thing she fears, is once again being abandoned. She was abandoned by her mother. She was abandoned by whoever left her at Fedra. Her friend Riley abandons her. She says at one point, everyone I've ever loved has either died or left me. That's everybody. It's Tess, everybody she's ever, cared for. And she wants to belong, but she's scared. So she uses sarcasm and things like that to kind of keep people at odds, and to, she goes inward, but she's also has this really strong sense of self-esteem. The scene that did that really concretized that for me is the scene after Tess dies. So after Tess dies, the opening of episode 3 is Joel building a kind of funeral pyre or funeral, thing for Tess, kind of an homage to her. And he returns to Ellie and he cannot look at her. And she tries to talk to him and he kind of really avoids it, doesn't want to talk to her. He doesn't want to look at her. He doesn't want to have anything to do with her. But eventually, and she tries to talk to him. She tries to, be friendly with him. It's clear that she's starting to want to connect with him and sympathize with him and be accepted by him in a sense. She's learned that he's very capable, protector, and he's smart and able to take care and protect her. And she I think, she recognizes that she's in a scary world and she needs that. But she has this sequence or this short little monologue or speech, I should say, that she tells to Joel that, hey, I'm not going to apologize for Tess. It wasn't my fault. You chose, because you wanted a car battery, to take me on this journey. You and Tess both chose this. So don't blame me for something that's not my fault. And to me, that was really a sign. And, with the way she said it, the way she delivered it, was a great acting moment where she really delivered, the actress Bella Ramsey really delivered that well, that it's not my fault. And she has no semblance of guilt because she's not guilty. And I think that's a great sign of self-esteem. She knows, what she needs in a sense, or she knows that what's not her fault, this is not her fault. Because another way people would have done this is somebody might have tried to empathize too much with Joel and say, oh, I'm so sorry. I can't believe you did this for me. And this is, like it was some sacrificial thing that he did. And it wasn't sacrificial. They made a choice to get a car battery because they had a journey to go on. And that choice led to Tess's death, period. It had nothing to do with Ellie. And Ellie is very confident in herself and in her moral being that she does not need to apologize. And she even says, he says, don't apologize. And she says, I wasn't going to apologize. She's very fierce about it. And that's when I really fell in love with the Ellie character, is that she's just so strong and she has such a strong sense of character. So it's a great little, moment there. So I think that relationship really starts there. He gives her like the briefest of nods, but he's still not, again, so from the very beginning, he does not want to take on this girl. There's obvious parallels between his daughter, and he just does not want to take on the responsibility. But little by little, she kind of, needles, gets her way into his veins, where he starts to, he can't help but start to like her. And he likes her little by little. She jokes with him. She tells him these puns, and, by episode 4 or 5, he's cracking up at some of these stupid puns, as he calls it. That's effing stupid, he says. And he wants to protect her. And then, of course, after the Bill note, the note that Bill sends to him, he starts to really have strong feelings for Ellie and what she represents and what she could be. And the fact that she's immune, and this, I want to stress this part of it. The fact that she is immune and may hold the cure to humanity has nothing to do with his affection and love for her. It is who she is and what she represents to him and what she means to him as an individualized human. That's what he chooses to. The ending sequence is the reason why we can see that that's true. The ending sequence of what happens to the two characters and the choice that Joel eventually makes in the last episode shows us as clearly as possible that the real reason he has taken on the burden and the responsibility and of the love he holds for her, which does have a kind of burden responsibility to it, especially in this apocalyptic world. It's much easier to not take on responsibility for somebody. So he takes on that responsibility, And he eventually, so I'm going to wrap up here by this last little sequence of talking about the conclusion. So they go on this journey. He slowly falls in love with her as a father to a daughter. There's the really, really touching sequence in the last episode. This is after Ellie has, really seen the evil of the world. So when she really sees, she's touched by pure evil with those cannibals. And a side of her is unlocked, a side that Joel has been trying to prevent from happening in her, which is the pure, furious brutality of wanting to eviscerate another human being, which is a kind of destroyer of Ellie's innocence. And Joel really tries to keep that from occurring. And, so he really tries to prevent that. And he also tries to protect himself. He tries to protect himself from helping her and from going on this journey because he feels like he's too weak and he's not capable. So he tries to pass that on. But overall, he's really trying to keep her from not only physical harm, but also emotional harm, which he fails. And he realizes that he fails on both these fronts. But he has grown enough as a person and as a parent, in a sense, to accept that as a part of the nature of her growth in this world of being an individual human. By the way, there is one relationship I did not focus on, but you can think about this relationship as a very important relationship. That's the Ellie-Riley relationship. And this is a big motivating factor for Ellie, of what's going on with Ellie. And the thing that happens with Ellie toward the end of the series, why she's doing this, is once she gets the mission from Marlene that she's immune and wants to save the world, or can save the world, she takes that very seriously, and she wants to now do that. And she wants Joel to help her do that. And that becomes the reason why Ellie is going to want to survive, is because Ellie had thought she was going to die with Riley, but then for whatever reason, because she's immune, she survived. And so and she loved Riley. Riley was the only person she loved, I think. And so that informs the whole sequence of what motivates Ellie to go across the country. It also lets you know why she is very curious as to how cordyceps work. So there's a sequence in episode 3 where she cuts open the forehead of a cordyceps because she wants to see because that's what's inside her. And she's curious how that operates. Excuse me. Okay, so now the last sequence, the finale. In the finale, we discover that the fireflies only know how to cure people by, and whether it's a logical way of doing this cure doesn't matter. The point is that in the scenario the creators have here, the fireflies believe that what you have to do is there's some mechanism of messenger neurons or whatever that fake it so that you gain immunity. And you can extract this, but in order to do it, they're going to have to cut into Ellie's brain and extract elements of her brain, which basically the procedure will definitely kill her. So the whole point is that the ending sequence and how they do it is science fiction. So it is fantasy. Whether it's real or not is irrelevant to the plot or to the theme and plot. It's enough of a reality to it. It's real within the story. That's what's important. So we discover that the fireflies have all along, and Marlene has all along planned to kill Ellie in order to save humanity. And this is the contrast to all the other stuff we've been talking about, which is this idea that, you love somebody and protect somebody not for global, universal, saving humanity reasons, but you live your life and you do these things because you love that person, because that person's an individual, sacrosanct human, even in a post-apocalyptic. That's what's the last remaining thing. That's what makes us human. If we don't have that, we are no longer human. I think that's what the story is really saying. And Joel has that. He is that selfish person, and he wants that selfish desire to maintain because he loves Ellie and he will do anything, and he does not care. He has no view, or not even for a second does he have a view that he has a duty to protect to save all of humanity. And by putting it in that context, whether you agree with that or not, like I think in real life, that dilemma would be an actual challenging dilemma to have, to save your daughter, to let your daughter die and save all of humanity, or, destroy the ability of humanity to survive, or at least this chance of immunity is gone. And that's a interesting moral dilemma that, how we would deal with that in real life is a challenge. I don't know what you would do. I think I would do what Joel did. I think I agree with Joel completely and wholeheartedly that, especially since they didn't give Ellie the choice. Now, if Ellie wants to go back as an adult and make that decision, that's her decision. But so long as she is the purview of Joel, the relationship, his responsibility, then it's his choice, I think. And I think he makes the right choice. And, now whether he had to actually kill the doctor versus like harming the doctor, that's I think another interesting one. But I think in that moment, he saw everybody as evil for doing this. And in a sense, they were evil because again, they were leading this young, innocent person to slaughter. And this is a whole, the whole issue of sacrifice. Like she is drawn as the innocent lamb, that those early scenes I showed you of her innocence and what she's like. And she's the innocent lamb being drawn to the slaughterhouse. And there's a question of, is that right? Is that acceptable? I always bring up this short story, The Ones Who Walked Away from Omelas, because in that short story, the question of it is, if you could have a utopia where it's literally whatever your vision of a utopia is, that's what you have here. Just think of your vision of a utopia. If you could have that, but the only caveat is that in a dark, dank basement, you have to keep a young little girl and you have to she has to be tortured constantly in order to keep this up. Would you do it? What's the right? And the ones who walked away from Omelas are the ones who said, no, we're not going to make that choice. That's the wrong choice. Even if it means everyone else in the world gets to have a utopia. And this is part of what it means to also, that's in this sequence, I think it's done even better because it's about Joel's love for an individualized human. I think this is why this is even better than Logan, although the same thing happens in the movie Logan in a sense, where Logan starts to follow. But the difference is that the individualization of the young girl in the young mutant in Logan is not as focused on and emphasized, and it's much more about his actual blood. Here, it's more about the actual choice because he has no connection to this girl. I mean, there's a sequence in this TV show, The Last of Us, where Joel, he is fine with letting her die. And not only that, there's a sequence where a young woman or a woman is incapable of taking the body of a dead boy and dumping it in the fire. Joel does it without any emotions because that's who he is. He's able to switch that off, and that's what it means to be a survivalist. And that changes. He now has something to fear. He now has something to care for, and he, loves this character. That's Ellie. Okay, now I'll just say one last thing about the lie that Joel says. I think this is an interesting choice. What it emphasizes is, again, the relationship is not a romantic relationship. It's a father-daughter relationship, obviously. And the issue here is that he believes he needs to keep, I believe this is what is going on here. Ellie has had, as part of her mission to survive and wanting to survive in this world, she has hope for the future. She saw that hope as in herself. She said in a couple times in the episodes, hey man, I'm going to save the world. At least you could do is sing me a song, right? Like she really believes that about herself. That's what is able to maintain her optimism and love for the future. So Joel wants to preserve that. And so he lies to her. He takes on the burden of lying to her to tell her that there's a lot of people with the cure. We're going to have there's a lot of people with the immunity. So you don't have to blame yourself for not being able to solve any problems here. Just live your life, be a good person. Because again, if you would have told her the truth, then she might have made the choice to go and kill herself. And, it's a tricky situation. Like, do you lie? But again, she's 14. Like, so does a parent lie in order to keep their child alive because they don't have the context? And again, I think it's a selfish decision. Should he have lied? I don't know, but it's, I'm going to say, as we end this episode here, that it's probably going to be pretty relevant to season 2, this lie. I'm sure, because lies cannot, especially lies of that magnitude, cannot be hidden forever. That's a fact. And, we may have to play this out in the second season. It gives us something, but it is even within this first season, it's an encapsulated season that is still, he made this choice as a parent. She chooses to still follow him. And that's, again, that emphasizes the choice aspect, which is what I'm trying to get at with what's so powerful about this story, is that it's not, and all these different pairings add up to that idea of, it's not, like with Rick in Walking Dead and his son and his wife, it's not about he has an obligation to his family that he chose before this whole thing. It's that that Joel in this story is consciously choosing a very specific, concretized individual girl. It has nothing to do with her immunity. That's why he chooses her and chooses to love her as a daughter. And that choice is why he makes the decision at the end to protect his daughter that he loves and is chosen individually to love. So, I take the theme to be something like, when, with civilization stripped, what remains is our chosen values. I believe that's really what's being emphasized, is the chosen values of our love. And it's not just because of the last final choice he makes. It's because of all those little elements I've been talking about, which is the pairings. And what I hope that if you listen to this whole time, what you got out of this is that you can, see a story for a lot more than just the surface level enjoyment that you get out of it. That if you dig deeper to a great story like this and you really think about all these things, and you could disagree with them, but just contemplate how they work together. You don't have to be a literature professor to do that. And in fact, you shouldn't. You just need to be a consumer of art. And this is a tool, I hope, that will help you become a better or more robust consumer of art, which is the role of the critic. Thank you. Until next time.